Tell me about your vision.
My vision is that we all stop trying to fit the mold of who we should be and just embrace who we are.
Can you tell me more about that?
I think it sounds really simple, right? Just be who you are. But we're inundated everywhere we look with this is what you should be. So, say you're a parent, this is how you should parent. Look on social media, there's people ready to tear you down for anything. If you're a businesswoman or a businessman, everywhere you look, there's this is what success should look like. This is what it looks like to be a professional. If you are a scientist, this is what you should be doing. And everywhere we look, and even in our relationships, this is what a healthy relationship should look like. We're just inundated with these ideas of this is how you need to behave, and this is what you need to look like, this is what you need to earn. And if we don't meet those standards, we feel like we're failing, and it can make us feel really ashamed of who we are. We're told, for example, let's take masculinity and femininity, or feminine. That's not that bad. And we're told, okay, say you are a successful man, this is how you should behave. You should hide your emotions. You shouldn't feel this. So when you do, it makes you feel like you're not good enough or you're not a real man. And it's the
Mhm.
same. You should be delicate and feminine if you're a woman. So we really need to try and break away from those standards that society really holds against us and just embrace what feels natural to us.
Mhm. And how did you get onto this path? I think what you shared is very valuable. I agree. Like if you go against your natural self,
Yeah.
like if someone as a man is more nurturing and caring for his ones, I mean, I don't think it's a bad quality to have anyway.
Yeah.
So how did you get onto this path and talking about this? Like where did this come from?
Well, I became a professor very young, and I had this idea of how I should behave. I was really struggling to find who I am as a professional, especially being a young woman. I knew when I would be on stage, there would be kind of eyes like, does she really belong here?
Mm,
So I had a look at everything around me and what everybody was telling me. And what I really learned was, well, if I'm going to be a strong, independent woman, I need to appear cold. I need to be stoic. I really need to be able to stand my ground against the men. And in my head, and from the society perspective, it was being cold because if you're warm, that's a weakness. So I took on that characteristic and I took it on as a professor, as a speaker, as a leader. And what I found was I thought that it was working for me. I thought, okay, well, people will respect me because this is what authority looks like. And actually, what I found was people couldn't relate to me. My young students, they would go to me for support. And one of my students said, well, I don't know how to talk to you because you just wouldn't understand. And I could see her pain. And I did absolutely understand, but I wasn't an inviting presence. I wasn't a warm presence because I had tried to appear very stoic and cold. And I just realized that the reason that I became a professor and joined education was to make a difference, was to empower and to create passion. And me holding this perspective of I need to appear one way was actually hindering my ability to help my students. So I kind of learned to let that perception go and just say, I'm just going to be me. I'm just going to let the warmth come out and let the weakness or what I perceived as weakness show. And actually, it was the complete opposite. People started connecting to me differently because it just felt more authentic.
mm. I'm gonna ask you one question on based on what you just told me. It's gonna be a little harder. Um, so this notion and or the idea that you had in your head that you needed to be firm and stand your ground, so that where did that come from in your mind?
Well, I think a lot of the time it comes from imposter syndrome
Mm,
when we don't feel like we meet the criteria to be able to do that job. And we think, well, I'm not good enough for this. So, because me as myself isn't good enough, I need to kind of create a persona that I can use to shield myself with so that people can look at the persona and be like, she actually knows what she's doing. So,
mm,
it largely comes from an air of insecurity. And it's something that we all experience when we go into something new. I hadn't even finished my PhD when I was a professor. I was doing them at the same time. So I was very young and I wasn't experienced in that field. And that's a really normal thing. Anytime we go into a new field, we always have that period. But it makes us feel like everybody around us knows what they're doing and we don't.
Mm,
So when you feel that, even though it's such a common thing, it feels like you're alone with it. It feels really isolating. So often we don't say to people, hey, I'm struggling a little bit with knowing what I'm doing. So we kind of try and take that on ourselves. And sometimes we do what I did and take a maladaptive approach of how can I create a fake persona to shield me from my own feelings of imposter syndrome.
that makes sense. Thank you for sharing that, and thank you for being open about it. Um, what would you say, Abby, is why or what you do? What gets you out of bed and talk about this to people every day?
I love seeing passion grow in other people. So my motto for everything I do is making science accessible. And I've always been someone that's loved psychology. I It's my favorite thing in the world. I know I'm biased, but I think it's the most exciting subject. I think it's the most important subject because we deal with people with everything we do. And I went into education because I had a pretty difficult upbringing and background. And when everything else was falling apart, the only thing that really kept me going was psychology. I found that I was good at studying. I found that I was really good at this subject, and it kind of became my lifeline. So for me, it was something I held on to, and then I just fell in love with it. So as I moved through education, my why became giving that to other people. So being a professor, my favorite thing would be to see a student who didn't understand something and didn't think they liked it. Then you see this spark in them when they start to get it and start to enjoy it, and you see that passion start to kind of burn a little bit. And then when I moved out of academia and went into the private sector,
Mm,
I realized that there's so many people out there that don't think science is fun and don't think that they would ever be able to do science and don't think that they'll ever be able to obtain that kind of knowledge because it's almost gate kept and it's not always promoted in an accessible way. The language isn't always understandable to someone without a certain level of education. So that's where my motto of making science accessible came in. And I wanted to take that science and give it to people that didn't think that science was fun. And it's been such a rewarding thing going into different fields and seeing people that were like, I never had an interest in this. And now I really do. And it's that little spark of passion that I see that gets me up.
that's awesome. Wow, thank you for sharing that. One more question for you for today's segment. How did you get started on this path? Like, what was the first things you ended up doing, and then where you are today?
So it's probably not the expected one. When I was 16, I was kicked out of college.
Mm,
I had failed all of my subjects. I was kicked out of my home, um, kicked out of my mum's house, kicked out of my dad's house. I was suffering with a drug addiction. It was a really difficult time in my life. And I had gone back to the college that had kicked me out and had asked if I do both years in one, can I stay? So if I redo the year, but I redo the year following because they didn't want me to stay for an extra time, they didn't want to have to deal with me for longer. So I said, if I do them all in one, can I stay? And my
mm,
psychology teacher let me back in and she gave me a chance where everybody else didn't believe in me and told me I couldn't. And I
mm,
didn't really have a stable home to go back to. It was my psychology teacher that said, you know what, you can do this. And that was when I started. I said to her, okay, well, I'll write you an essay every week. And I did. And I went from failing to getting almost perfect marks when I found out how what worked for me. And it was that was where I became interested in psychology because I realized this is the first thing I'm really good at.
mm.
And it was helping me understand my own behavior. And it just gave me, like I said, that lifeline, something that maybe everything else is falling apart, but this one part of my life, maybe I could be really good at this. And then I just ran with it and I never looked back.
That's amazing. Give me a little background though. You said you were in college at 16.
Yes. Oh,
Where
so
were you at that time?
college for me is, I think the US, you call it high school.
Okay.
So
So
at
okay.
the age of
Mm,
15 and 16 and 17, I was in the UK college, which is A1 and A2.
okay, that makes sense. Yeah, that
But
yeah, I
I
understand
think
that
that
now.
was your high school years.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. I just
Yeah.
wanted to clarify that. I'm like, oh, you're very
Yeah,
16 years
I
old.
always do that.
Awesome.
Yeah, there's
Yeah,
still some US, UK terms that I get messed up with.
yeah. That's very encouraging from your teacher. And
Yeah.
that she was there to help you out and see. So when you were doing all that, what challenges were you facing when you actually started doing them? Like, oh my gosh, it's easier or harder? Like, what were you thinking during those times?
Well, there's a lot of self-doubt that comes
Hmm.
in, especially when you don't have a stable family home, because obviously your mother would be someone that you go to reassure you. And my mother was not that person for me. So for a long time, I didn't have any self-belief. And all we really need sometimes is just one person to believe in us. And I had removed myself from my friend groups because, like I said, I had been um, dealing with some issues with drugs and alcohol. So I needed to remove myself from those groups. So I was really isolated and alone. So it was that one person that finally believed in me that made all the difference. Because before that, when you don't have self belief, also having everyone around you telling you you can't do it too is a really difficult thing. And her name was Miss Moon. And when she said, "You can do this," it was like she lit this fire in me because finally it kind of lit that fire of maybe I can. And then it turned everything because instead of me listening to everybody else saying I can't do it and letting that be my self perspective, because I had that one person saying you can, it flipped everything. And I said, you know what? Ignore everyone else. I'm going to prove them all wrong instead of falling
Nice.
into that self category too.
Thank you for being here today. I'm really happy that you tuned in to Vision Pros Live. I'm looking forward to seeing your reactions as these episodes continue to move forward. This is going to get more and more fun. We'll have more and more engagement as well. We'll invite people to participate in the show. And thank you for giving us your time and attention. Have an excellent time building out your vision and becoming a Vision Pro yourself.